Flirty. Have you ever found yourself drawn to someone's potential? Dating who someone could be or who you want them to be? Who you think they should be? Romanticizing the potential of a new connection? Wedding bells are ringing in your head. After a first date, perhaps flirty. Those rings are the sounds of Delulu, and I need you to come back to reality stat. Indeed, many of us have done this, myself included. Yes, I've been known to fall for potential, but no longer. Coming up in this episode, we welcome Dr. Sheva to the show, a psychologist and relationship expert, as together we explore what it means to date potential, why we do it, what this looks like, and how to shift our focus to the present moment, so we can have more fulfilling relationships based on reality and not potential. So, whether you're currently dating, in a relationship, or simply reflecting on past experiences, this episode is for you as we talk about how to not date potential. Let's do this, flirties.
I heard you wanted to flirt. I heard you wanted to flirt. I heard you wanted to flirt. Hello, my name is Benjamin. I'm the flirt coach and a gay Libra. Everyone has an inner flirt.
Hey, flirty.
Live, laugh, flirt.
Work the flirt.
Work the flirt. Delulu is the Salulu. Expert on the flirt.
Hey, flirty. There's always another flirt.
Everyone has an inner flirt. Get out of your head and into the flirt.
Flirties, up for discussion today is a question that you have been asking me to bring onto Flirtations, and that is how to not date potential. Our guest today, Dr. Sheva, welcome to the show.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I was really enjoying putting together the outline, the questions. The flirties came through as they always do. We've got lots to discuss. First things first, if you could share a little bit more about yourself with the flirties, your work. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be joining you on your podcast. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I am specializing in relationships, dating, communication, confidence, all the things that I feel like are really essential for us being able to live just like a meaningful, fulfilling life. So I focus a lot on our relationship with ourselves and how to improve the quality of our relationship with ourselves, and how that relationship really takes us into all of our relationships, and how to also improve those relationships. So I'm excited to be talking about this conversation because I think we're going to hit at so many different points of how we feel about ourselves, but also how do we then engage in those conversations with those that we're dating to ensure that, we don't just fall for potential. We really date the people that we want to and are aligned to date and really have those experiences with.
Exactly. Really, really important, and already some themes, I think, of camaraderie coming through today, of connection, as this is something that I talk about a lot in my content, because the connection, the relationship you have with yourself, it's like so often when we're dating, we forget that we're a huge, huge part of this process.
Absolutely. I think the way we feel about ourselves, what we're saying to ourselves, what we believe we're worthy of experiencing, all of that is like the foundation of how that dating experience is going to be for us. So the relationships that continue or don't continue. And so, absolutely. I think it comes back to connecting to us and who we are.
Yeah. And we got some questions about connection with the self and connections more broadly in dating coming up throughout this conversation. And I think I want to ask here right at the top, as we're going to be talking about dating potential and what that really means, what that looks like, how to not date potential, the different ways we date potential. So giving us some context here at the top, what does it mean to date someone's potential?
I think for me, when I think of dating someone's potential, I think you're dating in the hopes of who they will become versus who they are in this present moment. And maybe at times there may be some evidence of there's some information that is aligned with that future that we want to experience, but ultimately that person hasn't arrived yet to that point, right? So they could become that potentially, but they also may not become that. At the present time, there is that mismatch with what we want to experience in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, potential and I hear this from the flirties too, it presents itself in a variety of ways in the dating process. Like what were you were just speaking to, it's who someone could be, who you
Mhm.
want them to be, even if, who you feel like they should be. Like if
Mhm.
you, especially if you see them showing up in other areas of their life, let's just say with their career or with their friends, and it seems like they're
Yeah.
this really present, ambitious, driven, passionate person, and then with you, it's like, but wait, they're like this over here in this other area of your life. Why can't they be like that with me? So here we go,
Yeah.
kind of falling into the potential trap, and the one that has always gotten me the most, Dr. Shiva, I feel like is the potential of what was. So the
Mm.
dater that things start out super strong and it seems like they're very attentive and communicative, and then things
Mhm.
start to fall off a little bit or break
Mhm.
down, or it seems like they're pulling away, and now you're chasing to get that
Mhm.
potential of what once was back. Um, yeah, a few different ways that this idea of potential presents itself.
Absolutely. And you're so right. I think that it's this idea of potential. I think ultimately we're chasing or we're yearning or wanting, desiring something
Yeah.
that isn't here in this present moment. And so you're
Yeah.
right. Maybe we've experienced it with them in the past. And so
Mhm.
it gives us a greater sense of hopefulness of like, well, we could get there again, which could
Yes.
be true.
Yeah.
But also it may not be true, right? Because I think a lot of times when we're thinking about potential and dating potential, in my experience, I feel like usually that person who's dating the potential or wanting their experience to be different, they
Mhm.
become overly invested. Oftentimes we become overly invested in some
Yeah.
outcome or changing that person.
Mhm.
um, and so I feel like that within itself, we may feel like we have a greater sense of control when in reality a
Mm.
lot of it also depends on that other person, right? So
Yes.
maybe we can come back to how it was. Maybe they can grow into the ways that we want, but that missing link is them. And they actually have way more
Ooh.
control, I think, than we give them credit for at times or in our mind we think about.
Yes. Yes, and I'm gonna come back to what you just said, as I wanted to just kind of restate something you said, that I loved. This idea of potential really exists in the past and in the future. It's this
Mhm.
yeah, we're not in the present moment when we're talking about potential, and that's yeah, I think we'll come back to that. But the follow-up I have here is some of the ways, so some of the dating behaviors people can present in when they are looking to potential, chasing potential, dating someone's potential. You mentioned control there, perhaps.
Mhm.
So some dating, maybe you're sort of the fixer type, which has very much been
Mhm.
me. So some of the dating
Mhm.
behaviors that can present themselves for the dater that is looking at potential.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think as you're saying, I think the fixer type where we have this belief, and maybe we are really great at like supporting people in changing, right? And so we may
Yeah.
think like, oh, well, I could fix this or I could help them in growing. And I think that, comes back to that control piece of like, there's a lot that we can do, but even for people to grow or change, it really requires them to want to grow or change, or even think that that's something that they even believe needs to be changed, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of times I think, sometimes we may be putting on our own stuff, like our own desires, our own wishes, what we think a healthy, romantic relationship needs to be like.
Hmm.
And those desires that we may have, those goals may not necessarily be that other person's, but oftentimes we're coming in with that and trying to change them into
Yeah.
becoming that. I also think at the same time, it can be that fixer person, but also I think, a lot of us, which is a wonderful thing, we believe in the goodness of people. We believe in growth. We believe in
Yes.
like things evolving. And I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful thing. But I also think it's important to recognize, as I mentioned, growth and change and all of those things can happen for that other person as well, but they just may not be, they have to also buy into what or believe also what we believe to for growth to look like or for
Yeah.
change to look like, and their definition of that may be very different from the beginning. So I think it's also becoming clear on what that looks like for that person.
Mm. Yes. I totally agree. As we're hopeful romantics here on flirtations, and a few questions here. I think this is a good time to ask a couple of these questions that came through from the flirties, because so many of us are empaths. We
Yeah.
wanna we want to see the goodness in people. Give them the
Totally.
benefit of the doubt. And so this flirty says, how do I know if I'm dating the potential or, I'm doing that. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm seeing sort of, all the green flags, all their positive attributes, because the truth is people can have really fantastic qualities and also
Mhm.
not be the right partners for us. So how can you maintain this balance of seeing the good in people, seeing them for who they are, and not seeing them also for their potential? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
Okay.
And for the person who's asking this, I want to just say, like, it's such a hard dance, right? It can be such like it is so hard managing that, right? To like see the goodness in someone and also, not waste our own time or fall for that potential.
Mhm.
I think something that I think of is, coming back to that present moment. I think we can see the goodness in someone, but also ask ourselves, are my needs still being met? If the
Yes.
if things is stayed the way that they are, right? Like,
Mhm.
let's say nothing changed at this moment of time. Would I still be happy in a year or 5 years or in the future, right? And the
Mhm.
reason I ask that is because I think oftentimes when we're dating potential, we have this belief that if I give it enough time, more support, if the relationship grows or they fall in
Yeah.
love with me or things change, we will get to that ideal, right?
Yes.
Where I'm trying to get to. And I think when you want to ask yourself, is it just me seeing the goodness in the person, or is it, I'm dating potential? It's coming back to, if things maintain the way they are, will I be okay with that? Will my needs still be fulfilled? Will I be happy in this relationship?
Mhm.
I think it's, how do I feel in this present moment? And maybe it's a both and, in the sense that maybe you're recognizing, hey, this person has really great traits and they
Yeah.
have like all these great attributes. And also, they may not be meeting my needs at this moment of time.
Yeah.
And that's also okay, right? Because as you were saying, like, someone can have really great traits, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are, fulfilling our needs in this moment or actually helping us to have that relationship dynamic that we're wanting to experience in the long term.
Yes.
So I think it's like being honest with ourselves, but coming back to like checking in.
Yeah. So good. And we're going to spend, yeah, this is already so helpful, even for me. Single and out there dating. Oh my goodness, because it's not easy. And so I want to spend a little bit more time here offering the flirties some strategies here in
Sure.
this dating. Yes, in this world of dating, as I know so often we want to get to that milestone. It's to exclusivity, to the label or the exchanging of I love yous, like some of these big
Hmm.
moments, because it just gives us clarity. It gives us this sense of
Hmm.
safety around that connection of, okay, I know who this person is, the role they play in my life, the role I play in theirs. And we're doing this thing called life. We're at least, now
Yeah.
exclusive, or we're looking to more long-term partnership, something like that. But so much of dating happens in the gray. And so
Yeah.
I want to speak to how we can maintain boundaries and take care of ourselves and manage our own energy and even anxiety in the dating process
Hmm.
while still um, being okay with not having all the answers.
Yes.
Yes.
So tough,
I
right? It
know.
is so, especially when you start catching feelings, right? Like, you're
Yes.
like, there is a lot of anxiety. It can be a lot of anxiety. I think for me, what I would, anyone who's listening, and I think, this is something that I even think for my own relationships, right? I think in those moments, even prior to getting into a dating relationship, I think it's so important to spend some time to really get to know ourselves. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is really thinking about, what are my non-negotiables? What are my
Yeah,
needs? And like, you may not know all of that, right? We may not, some of them we may find out through experience when a need isn't being met, right? And then we realize
absolutely.
it's a need of ours. But I think like looking at past experiences and what were things that maybe contributed to a lot more pain for you, or moments where you felt more joy with someone or connection. I
Yeah.
think that can give us information as to those things that are foundational for our relationships. And and that may look different for each one of us to feel that sense of security, that sense of reassurance, right?
Mhm.
Of course, there's commonalities as well, but oftentimes, but I think it's so having that, honest check in with yourself. And then I think it's feeling comfortable in smaller and bigger ways to communicate those needs, right? And so like early on in dating, and I think that can feel like the most challenging for a lot of us because
Yeah.
I feel like in my experience, oftentimes I'll hear, people will say like, I don't want to be the person to initiate these conversations or to bring this up. Like the other person should bring it up. It's vulnerable. But I also think in bringing up some of our needs early on, or if a need isn't being met, you're going to learn a ton based on that person's reaction. Like that either is going to give you a sense of reassurance or it's going to become information as like, well, maybe we aren't compatible in this way. And it also allows us to, I think, not overly invest too, right? Like when you're communicating your needs, there's also real data that you're gathering in the present moment versus like overly investing based on our own ideas of who the person is, our own, desires of who they should be. So that's where I would start from. I know, of course, there's so much more, but that's where I would start from of like really thinking about checking in and also then communicating your needs and like your boundaries. And I think that can be helpful in so many ways.
Yes. And we're definitely going to be coming back to this question throughout the conversation because I got this question several times and I got to be honest, I struggled with how to word it and really phrase it and bring it into this conversation. And the question was about, do I wait for someone to change, right? They have said, oh, when this thing happens, I'll be more present. Or, just when this thing happens at work or whatever, I'm dealing with this stressful situation, sort of when this, what this kind of thing, where's that line perhaps between giving someone grace, being patient, waiting for them to be like maybe more available versus now we're starting to date their potential and who we think they could be, should be, who we want them to be on some of the things that they're telling us. But what you're offering here is really, really helpful because it does come back to yourself. What are your needs, wants, desires? You get to communicate. You get to certainly voice your expectations, not that they'll be met, but you get to voice them and have your boundaries in place. And when you're dating with that kind of centeredness and empowerment, like I don't think you can go wrong. Right?
I totally agree. Yeah. I feel like you're feeling so grounded. So like even if I think a lot of times when we're needing that reassurance, right? I think that can also be information to us that like we would benefit from giving ourselves that reassurance. And I think sometimes that, when we can stand in our own, you could say power, groundedness, whatever it may be, right? And communicate your own needs. I think that in some ways is like us reassuring ourselves that like our needs are important, right? And like just giving it energy and voicing it is bringing it up and giving the opportunity for those needs to be met, at least by the other person. But regardless, you're advocating for what's important to you. And I think that's important for each one of us in our relationship with ourselves and just really building our own confidence and our sense of self-worth. But one other thing that I would share about that, the question that you mentioned, it is so hard, right? Like you may be in a committed relationship and the person may say, hey, I'm going to propose when XYZ happens, right? And like you have this emotional investment, you believe them, you want to make it work. And I think so it's hard to say, when we should stop believing or whatnot. But what I would come back to is I think for each one of us, and our responses may all look different depending on like, where we're at, what we're wanting, the context of our lives in that relationship. But I think it's important to also realize that, what are my boundaries? Like if I agree to waiting this out, right? My partner is going through this like stressor, I want to wait it out. Or I'm dating this person and I want to give them a chance to improve in this area, right? How long am I willing to get waited out? Right. And that's for you to determine, right? I think for each one of us, it may look different, but like, what is that going to look like for you? And I think this can be helpful because I feel like oftentimes when we're dating potential, like time just goes by and we're just waiting, right? And then like nothing may change. But I think it's also holding ourselves to that boundary of like, okay, well, if this doesn't happen in the next 6 months or things don't start to improve, I don't start to see certain changes, whatever that may look like for us. Then what am I going to do at this point? Am I going to bring up the conversation again? Am I going to walk away? Am I going to accept? Like, I don't know, right? But like, again, but identifying for yourself what those outcomes may be, because I think a lot of times, I think in doing that, it actually helps us to come back to the present moment and confront the reality of what is.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is our needs aren't being fully met in this present moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking to a guy I dated that I was very much dating his potential. Like, after that first, second date, I was telling all my friends, like, oh my God, he's the one, we're going to get married kind of thing. And it started so strong. He wasn't love bombing. He wasn't doing the future faking thing. I just developed such an intense, strong connection to this person very, very quickly. And I'm going to ask you about that in a minute as I personally talk about myself for a second. And so those first few dates were incredible. And he was just so communicative and responsive and just so sweet. And like just showing up for me, meeting all my needs. Fantastic in the very beginning until things shifted and changed relatively quickly. And now he's starting to pull away. Right now, he's starting to be less communicative. And I was very much dating the potential of what he could be, what he once was, because you did this when I was a stranger for the most part. And now that we've gotten to know each other, what's shifting and changing? And I think his way of sort of putting a Band-Aid on that, so to speak, was offering the committed relationship. And so I got the label, I got the now we're boyfriends, even making it Facebook official, which back in the day was quite a thing.
That's huge. It's huge.
Which even that, I mean, I feel like I had to twist his arm, like practically beg for these things. But anyway, and then it became very much like, oh, when this project is done, when this thing happens, like as soon as, and I just didn't see any change, right? Like there was never even a little bit of movement forward towards those changes that I really needed, just to feel fulfilled, because it became it became very lonely in that relationship where you feel like you're just kind of in it by yourself. And I reached that point where I could not wait anymore. I was really abandoning myself. And I had to end it. And it was really, really difficult because I knew I would probably never see or talk to him again. But I knew it's what I needed to do because I was so hung up on his potential, who he was, who I wanted him to be, what we could be together, how happy we could be. And it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. And thank you for sure. I mean, I feel like it can be like you mentioned something like it felt so isolating and it just felt like you felt like so alone. And I feel like, for me, actually, when you mentioned that, what I thought of it was like how important it is for us not only to experience the consistency in action, but that reciprocity, right? Like, I feel like when we see that reciprocity, it's even if it's, on and off in the sense that like, there are going to be times where that person's going to be showing up more. You're going to be showing up more at other times. But there's that back and forth, right? There's not just one person consistently hoping for things to be different or putting in the effort or the energy to make things different for the relationship. I feel like that is so key. That's when I feel like there are two people are present in that experience and also wanting the same things, right? Because two people can be present, but maybe they don't want the same outcome, right? Maybe that emotional connection is going to look different for each one of us.
Totally. Yeah. I want to ask you now a little bit about the psychology behind potential, how we can maybe get attached to sort of the idealized version of someone, the fantasy of who they could be. We could even speak to limerence a little bit here. I think could be cool to bring into the conversation. So sort of the psychology behind dating potential and why it's I think for anyone dating, or even if you're on a dating break, we've all done it. Yeah, we've all done
totally.
It. What's happening in our brains and bodies when that's happening?
Yeah, what's so funny is like I feel like most of us do it even when we're not dating potential, right? And I feel like in general, when we start to like someone, we start to catch feelings. We tend to look at more of the goodness in them, right? We tend to, not only just focus on the good traits, but oftentimes idealize those good traits. It's like, like when you, like, this is just, I mean, it's like a side comment, but like not necessarily related to this same comment, but like, when someone starts liking someone, it's like, you're with them and the person, other partner makes a joke and the joke isn't even funny, but to that person, it's so funny, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, this was like the best joke.
It's the best joke ever.
Like this person I'm dating is like the funniest person. And everyone else is like, oh, okay, yeah, it wasn't bad. But like I share that to say, like, even in relationships that could end up being where we're dating that present person, like we tend to overvalue those more positive traits early on as we're starting to catch feelings. And I think this is especially true when we're dating potential, because not only I feel like are we overvaluing maybe some of those little glimmers of positive or those positive traits that we're seeing, but we're undervaluing what also isn't being met in that moment. Right? Like what are also undervaluing what that may mean for our future. So we're overvaluing the positive and the likelihood of that changing, but we're undervaluing, what isn't being met. And I think also the other piece, related to like when I think about the psychology of it, I think when we're, not only are we tending to like buy into that, going with that attraction, the fantasy, if there's great chemistry, but I also think oftentimes we need to pay attention to what we believe we're worthy of experiencing. And I think sometimes when I think about falling for potential, it's, this belief that like, maybe that person's not out there. Maybe I don't deserve experiencing that person who has it all together and is able to meet all my needs. But also like this belief of, and I know we all hear this, like relationships are hard work. Right. Yeah. And so there may be this belief that I need to really try to make this person that person that I'm meant to, date or be with. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but those are my like initial reactions to it.
Oh, you did. And you brought up another question, actually, a perfect layup for this next question from a flirty. And we're going to come back to, this part of this conversation in a moment too, where this flirty says, I feel like I've had my heart broken so many times. And so when I do meet someone that is even giving me, maybe it's breadcrumbs, maybe it's just a little bit, I just tend, like, this is my tendency. I fall deeply. And then I'm caught up in this wave of potential now. I'm not necessarily evaluating or seeing them for who they are. I'm not really staying grounded in my needs, my boundaries here. I'm just more so, it just feels good. So for the flirty listening that is relating to that experience, because attention and connection, it feels good.
It feels good. Yeah, 100%. It feels, I think it for all of us, right? Like it feels good when we feel like someone's into us, even if they are not necessarily the person, even at times we're not necessarily maybe fully into them, but it feels good when someone's attracted to us, we feel that sense of connection, safety. Yeah. I think when I think about that, I think of two things that come to mind for me. I feel like, on the one hand, I feel like it's great that we're aware of this about ourselves, right? If you tend to be the person who maybe attaches too quickly or idealizes, I think on the one hand, it requires more of that inner work. So you know this about yourself. So like, what can you do to help yourself to improve your sense of self-worth, your, belief in what you deserve? And these are like your inherent value, right? I think with that also, it's like, when we even think about dating potential, I think a lot of times we may be overvaluing what that person can bring to our lives, and we undervalue like who we are and what we offer them in the relationship. So I think it's focusing on that inner sense of who you are and your self-worth. And then I think the second piece is thinking about what can you strategically do given the information that you know about yourself. So, maybe it's if I am someone who tends to get overly involved with someone really quickly, maybe I want to be intentional about like slowing down the pacing, like real
Yeah.
slow for myself,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So like, I think it's also thinking about like the skills and the steps that we can take in our dating process, or maybe it's, having like specific questions that I know are really important to me or connected to my non-negotiables. And I'm going to ask this person, I'm going to ask them one question on each day, right? Like those are more strategic things that allow us to stay in that present moment and also allow us to see like, it is my read of this person of who they could be for me or a relationship, is it accurate based on what they say, right? Because that person may say something and you're like, oh, like this doesn't fit into the vision that I had of you.
Yes. Yes.
So I think it's like a
Absolutely.
twofold.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be really helpful for the flirty that submitted that question. And we're going to, yeah. So now I want to talk about some dating strategies for the
Mm.
dater that has tended to date fall for potential, which is me. And one
Mhm.
one thing you were just speaking to is yes, knowing yourself and what you're looking for, and that's going to be really important, but also some of your patterns and habits in dating.
Mhm.
So like speaking to the limerence piece for a moment, like if you have this habit of going into infatuation, obsession, just sort of 0 to 100, where they're
Mhm.
occupying all of your mental space, it's like you've got to have some of those breaks in place to give yourself some space to still show up for you and your
Mhm.
perhaps career, your education, your other friends, family,
Mhm.
pets, right? Still have all the time and space and energy for that. So a couple strategies like for me is we're not doing the following on social media thing. Like if you met on a dating
Mhm.
app and now I know you want to vet them on Instagram and you want to see if they're a real person, a lot of the dating apps have those verification features in place
Right.
now. So it's you want to check, fine, but it's probably who they say they are. So we're not doing the whole social media thing, right? We're not texting all day every day.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. Like very much using more of that slow burn approach, which then gives me that space to really see,
Yeah.
okay, how is this person showing up? Not how I want them to. I wish they would, how they could,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
expectations of it all. How are they showing up today?
Yeah,
Date to
absolutely.
date, day to day. Yeah.
But I think Benjamin, you bring up a great point because I feel like also with that, it's when we do the slower, getting to know, more intentional, like I think that will actually filter out that person who's not going to be
Mm,
consistent in the long term,
whew,
right? So like
yes.
that requires a lot of time and energy, like for you to slowly build the relationship. So I think it really is going to more likely, not always, but it's increase the likelihood of the person who's going to stick around after a few weeks and get to know you in this way. They're probably also going to be more curious about you, maybe more presenting more intentionally, wanting to get to know you. Again, that may
Yep.
not always happen, but I think a lot of times it can help with that.
Hmm.
But yeah, you bring a great, and it's like, just slowing, really trying to get to know that person versus how they may present on social media or in other areas of their lives.
Yeah.
I wanted to also share, I think it can also be helpful if, you're someone who tends to fall maybe a lot quicker or like, fall into that like infatuation,
Hmm.
idealization of who that person is. I think it's even helpful to like take a step back and jot down like, what is it that you like about this person?
Mm,
What
mm,
specific traits do they have?
yes.
Right? Like, is it that they're considerate? And how do you know? Like, how do you know they're considerate? Right? Because I
Yeah.
think like we tend to assign certain, labels to people and there's like significant meaning that comes with that. But a lot
Yes.
of times there may not, if we're just, dating potential, we may not always have evidence for it. It may be our future hypothetical evidence, right? Of what they
Hmm.
could be.
Hmm.
I even think of, so I think it's jotting that down. And I think the other thing is like sometimes, and I'll do this for other situations as well, but like asking yourself, like, if I take a step back and my friend was dating this person,
Yeah.
how would I perceive them based on how they're showing up, based on like their consistent actions, like not what they're
Yes.
saying, but how they're showing up in relation to this person.
Yeah.
And I think usually with other people, we're definitely able to be more objective as we take that emotional lens, maybe distance
Mm,
distance from it a little bit more.
Yes, I think so too. Objectivity sometimes is rather difficult when you catch the feels.
Totally. Yeah,
um,
100%.
it really is. Okay, we're gonna spend some more time here offering some dating strategies. And this one, I don't think it's a hot take, but I think some people may feel some type of way. And that
Okay.
is you can't date. I mean, if you're just all about having some casual fun, by all means, have the fun, but you cannot date solely someone's looks, their money, the title, the status, the job, the
Yeah.
car, whatever, their frequent flyer points, like they're traveling the world. And I think sometimes, right, we see visually someone that we find very
Yeah.
attractive, or we see, oh my gosh, they could provide me financial security, my life could be so easy. And now it's this potential of a whirlwind romance, just like the picture perfect house or whatever.
Mhm.
But remove all of that, and who are they? Remove all of that, how are they actually showing up for you? Remove all of that, and what do you know about them? Do your values
Mhm.
align? Are they
Yeah.
respectful? Do they acknowledge your boundaries? Do they ask you questions? Do they try and get to know you? Yeah. So I
Mhm.
think some of the superficial stuff is sometimes a distraction and really takes us into that potential trap. What do you
Yeah,
think?
those rose-colored glasses. No, I agree
Woo!
with you. I think a
Yeah.
lot of times it leads us to, it makes it harder for us to see the reality of what is, right? Because we're seeing
Hmm.
these other, sparkly things or things that are like we actually
Yes.
really do want within our lives. And I think you're right. I think it's coming back to, values is huge. Like, even when we're thinking about dating potential, I think for me, there may be someone who is willing to grow and as you communicate with them is willing to change in the ways that you're wanting.
Mm.
Um, and I think, in those instances, I think it can, of course, I do believe in people being able to change, of course, given
Yes.
obviously what I do,
Yes.
but I also think understanding someone's values is so important and understanding, because that's going to give us information of the likelihood of them being able to change, at least in the ways that it's going to be also aligned for us. So
Yeah.
seeing are there similarities in values and lifestyle and goals and, how they want to be showing up within the relationship. Do
Yeah.
they want to get there? Is it just you that wants to get there? But, want them to get there. But I want to come back to just, what you were mentioning. I think of course it's, paying attention to those pieces, but also I think even checking in with yourself and see how do I feel with this person? Like
Yeah.
when I'm with them, how do I feel? Like, do I actually enjoy this person? Like we
Yeah.
take away the money, all of those things. Like, do I like being in their presence? Do they help me to feel better? Like, um, do I experience positive, like sort of, I mean, I say basics, but also they're so foundational. But I don't think we always think about these things of how does it feel just to be in this person's presence? Or, how do they respond to me when I'm sad or whatever it may be? I think
Truly.
that
Hmm.
too can give us so much information.
Yeah.
And I feel like those are the pieces that actually stay with us like throughout life. Like
Yeah.
those other factors, of course, influence our experiences, but those are the things that are most felt that when they're missing, we really, I feel like definitely do feel.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad you mentioned this now, as we were talking a little bit earlier in the conversation about how potential largely exists in the past and the future. And how
Mm.
can we bring more presence and present moment connection into our dating lives? I think what you just offered, the flirties, is are several strategies for how to do
Mm.
just that. So I'm glad this came back up in this episode today. And now I wanted to ask you, and this came from a flirty as well, about we've been talking a little bit about it, but how can you know, or are there ways to tell that someone is changing? Um,
Mm.
it's so it's right, you're not really dating potential, but they've said, okay, I'm gonna change, this is gonna get better, whatever. Insert anything here. How can you know they're actually like the needle is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think for me, and I'm sure for you too, like I pay a ton of attention to what actions are taken. I think it's one thing to say it, and I think that's important that I want to
Mhm.
change, I will change, whatever it may be. But I think at the end of the day, are they taking consistent action towards that? Right.
Yeah.
And maybe it's very small steps, but are there steps?
Yeah.
Right. So like for instance, like if if communication is really important to me and I bring it up to someone
Mm-hmm.
and maybe communication isn't in their comfort zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they want to get there. Like they value that, they value that as well. Okay, do I notice that they've started to communicate in different ways? Maybe through text, maybe through phone calls. Are they becoming more vulnerable, right? Like, are there steps that are being taken?
Yeah.
So I think it's really coming back to that piece of, are there steps that are taken? And I also think it's also important to honor the fact that, people may change, and at the end of the day, they may not always get to where we want them to get to, right? Like, so
Yeah.
maybe you're at a
Yeah.
number 10 with communication, and maybe this person will grow and evolve, but they make it to 5 if they're starting at 0, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Will you be okay with that? I think that's
Yeah.
the other piece of, like, we all have our own strengths, our areas of growth, our own limits. And so it's being also, honoring that person for also who they are, while also at the same time honoring your needs and recognizing that that is also okay for you to get those needs. And you definitely should, advocate for getting those needs met.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think, yes, accountability, like what comes to mind is accountability for me, and then
Mhm.
also compromise. So let's just say, as an example, like you've been on a few dates, you've been dating a month kind of thing, and you're sort of moving towards exclusivity now. It's just going to be us. We're off the apps. But you would really like more communication. You feel like, the dates are happening when you're hanging out, everything's good, but in between, it's just like you feel like you're really initiating a lot. It's just
Mhm.
communication isn't great. So you get to voice that expectation that, if for me to really grow this connection and feel closer to you, it's important that we communicate in between our dates. Can they acknowledge, right, where you're
Yeah.
coming from without judging, without blaming, without being like, oh, well, that's not what I need, but you're developing a connection, perhaps for a relationship. So understanding the other person's needs is also important. Can
Yeah.
they take accountability and then compromise? So does the texting increase? Or maybe it's like, hey, how about I call you on my way home from work? Something
Yeah.
like that. Or how about we link up on, I love this app, Marco Polo. You can send video messages to one another. It's totally free. Maybe we do a voice note, something like that. So does it seem like they're able to take accountability for their role in this, and then compromise? Because ultimately, to your point, it's not that your expectations are going to be met exactly how you want on
100%.
your
Yeah.
timeline 100% of the time. Is just not realistic, and it doesn't mean, if that happens, that you're also still kind of dating potential here. It's yeah.
Yeah. No,
Hmm.
and I love how you said on your timeline, right? Because someone may eventually get to where we want them to get to, but also, yeah, the reality is we all grow and evolve at our own paces
Yes.
too. So it is being flexible while still at the same time ensuring that, like, are my needs being met? Is this aligned with
Yes.
my values, right? And I think that you're so right of, like, is that person willing to take accountability and willing to invest in the relationship, of seeing it as an investment in the relationship,
Yeah.
of like, let me communicate in ways that also feel comfortable for me, but also allow me to demonstrate to you that I care about this relationship and I want it to
Exactly.
grow and connect.
Exactly. So I think I want to just have a couple more questions, and this one here is around anxiety. So for the
Mhm.
dater that good Lord, I feel like this is all of us that experience at least some amount of relational anxiety if you're dating,
Mhm.
or really, I think in a lot of our relationships, friendships too. So for the dater that is having some difficulty coming into the present moment, having some anxiety, really being objective, what's happening here with needs, wants, desires, all of that good stuff, and is just sort of in their head, in their body, feeling very anxious. Yeah, a tip or two for them.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think easier said than done, but of
Hmm.
course, we want to try to bring our focus back to the present moment as much as we can.
Yeah.
I think, in those situations, I think it's really helpful when we're experiencing more of that anxiety to focus on something else, right? In the sense of, like, if you're on a date and you're feeling more anxious, like, maybe rather than focusing on what's happening for you internally with
Yeah.
anxiety, the thoughts, the increased heart rate, whatever is going on, like redirecting your attention maybe to that moment, maybe an activity that's happening that you guys are both engaging in, or asking that person a set of questions that you have already prepared. I think those could be some things. I think the other thing is, you know, I think it's also reminding ourselves what we would benefit from hearing. And maybe when we're not in that anxious state, asking ourselves, like, what is it that I would really give me that sense where I'm like soothing myself? I feel really heard and supported. And the reason this is coming up for me is I think sometimes when we're experiencing that anxiety, it's like we have this belief that things should be going at a certain rate, or they should be responding at this way. That must mean that they like me, or if they don't respond that way. And I think it can be helpful to remind ourselves that, you know, every relationship looks different, right? Like we may describe, you know, certain, you know, things to look out for or whatnot, but at the end of the day, no one relationship, in my opinion, you know, always looks 100% the same. And so giving yourself that assurance that, like, you know, that it is likely that you will be okay in whatever way you need to say that to yourself as you're handling and approaching that situation that you're in. And then I think the last thing that comes to mind is just identifying, you know, who in your life you trust and you feel comfortable with, and confiding in them. I think a lot of times when we're in that state where we're feeling more anxious, just having that other person be like, yeah, it makes sense that you're feeling anxious, or this sounds like it's really great, or, you know, no, actually you're missing this point, can be really helpful in like helping us to feel more grounded when we feel like we can't get there ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good tips. And it's always, it's a practice. It's a process.
Yeah.
There'll be many different strategies. A few that have helped me, and I've mentioned to the flirties, is that feelings are not facts kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, if you're just getting to someone new or getting to know someone new, it's been a date or two and you're having some anxiety about like, oh, getting to that next date. It doesn't mean like they don't like you or like that the worst has happened. And so try and just acknowledge the anxiety for what it is. Some flirties have told me that even naming it is helpful. Just to really
naming
like
to tame it.
Yes, yes, exactly. That can be helpful. And then to just recognize that this is going to be part of it. And if you find yourself going into the coulds, woulds, shoulds, like you're kind of going into this mindset of potential, like I don't judge yourself for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I was actually going to mention that. I think I love the point of naming to tame it, right? Because I think when we name and tame it, it does take away some of that charge, right? And it keeps us in that present moment. But yeah, I'm all about self-compassion. I think, you know, like I oftentimes will tell people, you know, treat yourself like you would someone you care about. And it's like usually when we're feeling that anxious, usually for many of us, including myself, right? I'm like, why am I responding in this way? Or I wish I was feeling differently.
Yeah.
And just recognizing, you know, labeling that emotion for what it is without any judgment. This is your process. And as you mentioned, oftentimes when we're getting to know someone that has a very different background than us, different experiences, relational experiences, they're not going to respond exactly like we would respond or how we think they should be responding.
Right.
And rather than attaching meaning to that, which is hard, right? Because we unintentionally just immediately will attach meaning to people's behaviors. But I think it's also recognizing and, you know, reminding yourself that this may be to a certain extent part of the process, and sort of allowing things to unfold maybe at a slower pace, more naturally, before we attach such great meaning, either positively or negatively. Because it's usually not, you know, people's early behaviors, you know, oftentimes aren't about us. I oftentimes say, you know, we tend to respond early on in dating, you know, how we tend to respond early on in dating. So it's part of what we're reacting to the other person is just how we tend to show up early on.
Yeah. So good. I mean, I've said Delulu is a Salulu, but in moderation. So if you're like me and you're like one day you're picking out your wedding song, okay, let's, is there a second date is the next step. That is, let me fantasize for a moment. Am I wearing all white? Is it a beach wedding? I don't know. And then, okay, Benjamin, that's enough. Catch yourself.
We're gonna limit that.
Yes. You can't be.
Yeah, you want to enjoy the date, and like if it was a great first date, enjoy it. and then also recognize that it was just a first date, right? It's just like
Exactly.
it's this dance between like, allowing yourself to experience that joy and that excitement, and
Yeah.
also the recognition that there's still a lot more to unfold, and
Ugh.
hopefully it will be positive.
Yes. Let the connection build up over time in
Yeah,
reality versus just in your head, because then this disconnect between the fantasy and reality, it just like it creates this chasm perhaps if and now the other person is like, you start to maybe see icks in them, or you're picking them apart, or like nothing's
yeah,
ever good enough. And so just come back to the moment, to reality. How are they showing up for you? How are you showing up for them? So important. Bringing it very much
yeah,
in many ways back to the basics.
yeah.
They're
Back
the
to
basics
you.
for a
Yeah,
reason. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I want to
Mm.
just come back to and just highlight the
Yeah.
point that you also mentioned of like, even when we're thinking about even relational anxiety, but just in relationships in general, I think it's so important early on. There may be this pull to like, we're excited about someone, they become, we start focusing on them all the time. You want to like spend all your available hours with them early on. And so I think it's so important, like what you said, ensuring that you are still investing in other areas of your life that make
Yes.
you who you are as a
Yes.
professional, as a person, as a family member, and that are connected to your values. I think that's important. I think sometimes, in those early phases, it may feel like, but I want to spend all this time with this person. I'm so excited to get to know them. But also, I think it's reminding yourself of why it's actually important for you to focus on other parts of your life.
Hmm.
And because it allows you to continue to nourish your relationship with you. And ultimately, I think it's a great investment, not just for you, but that future relationship that you may have with this person or another person, right? Like if
Yes.
you're coming in more fulfilled, it's going to serve all parties involved.
Hmm. Hmm. I agree with all of that. My goodness. Dr. Shiva, these conversations always go so quickly. The only other question I have is any parting words of wisdom for the flirties, where you live on the internet, how they could follow you. And I believe you have a podcast as well.
Yes, yes. No, thank you. My parting words are just being compassionate to yourself throughout this journey as you're like
Yes.
building your confidence, your relational skills, as you're showing up in the ways that you're wanting to, and just taking care of you. That is my parting words. But
Yes.
um, thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. I love
Hmm.
connecting with you and
Hmm.
connecting with all the flirties.
Yes.
You can connect with me on Instagram or TikTok at Dr. Sheva, and I am a podcast host. I have podcasts focused all on relationships and confidence, and similar to a lot of what we've been talking about.
Hmm.
And it's Tell Me Some More with Dr. Sheva, and it's available where all podcasts are available. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing this space with us and sharing more about yourself and so much wisdom with the flirties. I'll make sure and have those links listed here in the show notes for this episode. I think that's a wrap. Dr. Shiva, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Flirties, that's going to do it for this episode of Flirtations, the How to Not Date potential episode with our special guest for this conversation, Dr. Shiva. Thank you to Dr. Shiva for sharing so much insight and wisdom with us today on how to stay grounded in reality and not get caught up in the whirlwinds of potential. Thank you. For more on Dr. Shiva and to work with her, follow her. Links in the show notes below. Yeah. Winding things down here at Flirt Headquarters. Thank you so much for listening, for tuning in, for streaming, wherever you may be in the world. I could not do this without you. Emphasis on could not. So thank you so much for listening and for sharing and rating, reviewing, subscribing. It all matters so much. For following, liking, all the things, the way you all show up and engage with flirtations and with Flirtstagram and all the things. It's incredible. And I'm really happy to just be here for you and support you in any way I can through your flirting and dating journeys. So thank you so much. All right, signing off officially here at Flirt Headquarters. My name is Benjamin. I'm the flirt coach and gay Libra flirty. Happy flirting.